John Green's CV includes occupations such as research scientist, web designer, and author. It also includes the role of professional astrologer with more than 25 years' experience in the field. He's also the present editor of the Astrological Journal, the International Journal of the Astrological Association, or AA as astrologers call it. He's also studied at the Centre for Psychological Astrology, and this is where he now works as a teacher. And it's this aspect of astrology, looking at birth charts in conjunction with depth psychology, that we'll be focusing on in today's interview. Hi John, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Tell us a few things about what you're doing at the moment in astrology.
Well, basically, I mean, a lot of my time is taken up teaching. I want to just mention, actually, you mentioned the Astrological Journal.
Yeah.
And I finished editing that at the beginning of this year.
Okay.
That was my last issue, so I'm no longer the editor of that, but I did about 5 years doing that, so that was a lot of fun, but a lot of hard work as
Okay.
well. So what I'm concentrating on at the moment, obviously client work as an astrologer. I also teach 2 online courses for the Centre for Psychological Astrology, a sort of basic foundation, to help people get started in astrology. And then I do an intermediate course. Because these are online courses, they sort of, I have students from all over the world, which is lovely actually. So
Yeah.
we all come together, we can ask their questions, etc. It's done as a live thing, but it's also recorded so they can watch it, at any time they want. So it's really opened up that sort of world of teaching rather than just being in a room in London and teaching to, say, 20 or so people. I can now, reach everybody all over the world. So I do a lot of time doing that, and then as it's the sort of summer break from teaching, I'm working on a book at the moment, an astrology book on synastry, which I'm hoping to get out later on this year. So those are the main things that I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, will this book on synastry, will it have lots of the Jungian type astrology? Will it?
Yes, absolutely. It's from a psychological perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I work. And the idea with the book, there are quite a few synastry books, but a lot of them take the sort of cookbook approach of, just listing, if his sun is on your Saturn, or if his moon is on your Mars, etc., which is fine, when you're starting out to learn. But obviously, synastry work is a lot more complex than that. So I taught a course for some of my students on synastry, and I'm using that as the basis of the book. So it's expanding that idea and making it so you can do far more detailed synastry work, and it incorporates some of their questions, etc. So hopefully people get an idea of what they're doing, and also their questions get answered because there were real life students taking it at the time. So that's the idea with it.
Sure. How did you first, become acquainted with astrology?
When I was very little, actually, right from a child, my mum and dad, although not astrologers, were interested in basic sun sign astrology, and they always read their horoscopes in the paper and stuff like that. So, just from an early age, I was sort of brought up knowing that there was something about astrology. And then as I got a bit older and started going to the library, I just started taking out books on astrology. So by about the age of probably 11 or so, I was reading astrology books, getting my chart, learning how to calculate my chart and other people's chart, etc., and sort of working from there. And it built up from there. I did a couple of sort of local evening classes on it.
Yeah.
And then as I got more interested, and I sort of discovered Liz Green's books and Howard Sportis' books, I realised that I really wanted to train at the CPA, which I eventually did when I could afford it, and I qualified there with the diploma. And then since then, I've been working alongside them and teaching for them.
Okay. How do you think it works?
That's the classic question.
Well, I always ask this one.
Obviously, this is a question I'm always asked when teaching, particularly the foundation. And I have to be totally honest, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I know it works. I've seen it work. And it works very well. But how, And there have been all sorts of books and articles written about, possible ideas, etc. How it may have a physical thing. But I don't think there is any physical cause and effect to it. I think it is a sense of more correlation. That class, as it's been studied right from, very early times, people have looked to the heavens and they've seen certain configurations, and at the same time certain things have happened on Earth, or certain things have happened to them, and that there's that correlation. How it exactly works, I don't know. I think it's that sort of as above, so below, reflection, if you like.
Yeah.
That's in a lot of metaphysical studies, whether it's magic or astrology or whatever. But and I'm not sure that we'll ever come to a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I found that I've asked, like I said, I've asked this question of many different astrologers, and I was surprised to find that each individual astrologer has a slightly different take on it as well. But that's how we learn anyway, isn't it? We learn by ourselves. Absolutely. Mostly, because it can't be any other way. But it sort of relates to the question that I asked earlier about what kind of reaction do you get, because one friend of mine is a philosophy professor, and the other one's he's a biology teacher, and they're both sort of fans of Richard Dawkins, who famously derides astrology. And I'd sort of tried to say, well, imagine, I think that there may be a parallel with Jungian archetypes. When we look at the anima, say, and the feminine planets on the chart, the moon and Venus on a male chart, but we don't really know how they work either, do we?
Absolutely. I think the only problem with that is that an awful lot of, say let's call them the Dawkins crew, would not have any truck with Jungian archetypes either.
No.
Again, because you can't prove it, and this is the problem. People want things pinned down, and there are a lot of people that would consider psychology still a pseudo-science, as they like to, name it. So I think certainly, for the I hate to say the word average because there is no average, but for the general public, I think the idea of psychology, they recognise that. The idea of astrology, they recognise that. And I think that. I think people in general are happy to accept there are some things we just don't know, because we've all had things in our life. If you take the Jungian idea of synchronicity, it's something that a lot of people have experienced. Again, how do you prove it? Well, you can't. But it's something that, people will recognise, that idea that, two disparate events happen, but they give you a particular meaning, something that you extract from that. And I think people are very familiar with that idea and quite happy with it, yet again, no scientific proof.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But as far as I think there is a lot, in essence, that works in the way that archetypes do, etc. And there are things that I think as people that we actually realise that we've picked up on things, we know things that haven't necessarily been taught to us, but we just relate to these same experiences that have happened to people since time immemorial.
Yes, it's part of being human, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have any system when you start interpreting a chart? Is there?
No, I'm not a huge fan of systems, I sort of give a system when I teach, because I know that a lot of people do like a system. I want to start here, and then I'll look at this, and then I'll look at that. And I think that can be great when you're starting out, because it's hard. There's such a wealth of information in a chart that you sort of want some point to sort of like, well, where do I begin in all of this?
Sometimes, do you not find that you look at a chart and you won't need a system because it'll tell you where to start? For example, if I use a system at all, I might look at elemental, preponderance, and I can look at a chart and go, there are tons of water signs. We have to start here.
Yeah.
The emphasis is all there.
Absolutely, and that's how I tend to work. It's what strikes me about the chart.
Yeah.
It could be a T-square, it could be a stellium all in one sign. It could be, as you say, an elemental imbalance or whatever. That just draws you in, and you start from there, and then you start following the aspects, and see where everything leads you. So that's how I tend to work. It's just what draws me in initially.
Given that computer programs are everywhere, I mean, how important is it to be able to use an ephemeris for an astrologer?
I think it's very important, actually. I appreciate the usefulness of technology, the fact that we're doing this, and this is very easy to do, and the fact that I can teach all over the world. I mean, I love technology, but there is something you cannot beat of having a book, or a booklet, that's there in front of you and that you can just look at. And sometimes I think it can be very quick, far quicker than looking up various things. It's something you can carry around, and I mean, certainly I know I do, but also a lot of my astrology friends, if we're talking about something, go, well, when does that end? Or, when is that moving into the next sign? And, we don't look on our phones, if you've got the book to hand, you grab it and you flick through and go, okay, that's where it is. Oh, and then it goes retrograde here. And it's so much easier to see on the page, I think, than, trying to run through with various technologies. I think that's the beauty of it. And I think in learning astrology, it's so important to understand how the astronomy of it works, if you like. And so, therefore, by looking at ephemeris, it's so much easier for students to understand that's the rate of motion of each planet. That's how fast they move, or how slow they move. This is where they go retrograde. This is how the moon phases work, etc. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's very easy when using computer programs. Yeah, absolutely, they're important. They're useful to our everyday life, and they revolutionised astrology and the ability to quickly draw up charts. But I think that knowledge of understanding how the planets move and how they work is vital, and I think you get that far better from an ephemeris. And using an ephemeris and tables and houses, etc., just to draw up a few charts, even if you don't do it every single time, so I'm sure most of us don't anymore. Just to know how to do it, and then you can spot mistakes in a software, or where you've made an error, because you understand how the astronomy of it actually works. And I think that's the most important benefit of them.
Did you have to use the little Raphael'S when you were studying?
Yeah, I've always had it about. It's it helped. I mean, certainly when I first studied, as I said, I was doing charts by hand, and we didn't have as simple, software or as readily available when I was doing that. So it was just, part of your toolkit to understand. And I said it's still useful to, if you're sitting with a client and you can just quickly look things up and, even point it out to them on a book, which I think people like to see that. They like to see it written down and preserved, and not just something that's sort of ephemeral and, on a strange bit of software or on an internet site, etc.
Yeah, I think the small annual RE is the only one with declinations now. A lot of astrologers have pointed that out, that they can't find it anywhere else. I mean, Bernadette Brady was saying declination gives you the another dimension. It's the up and down of the chart rather than across.
Absolutely, and again, that helps you visualize it, and I think that's vitally important to actually be able to see it, and that's something that's very easy to miss. Just by using a software. And I mean, certainly when I teach, I like to introduce the idea of the astronomy and how they move and how the planets work, and just why we have an eclipse, what the thing is, and so. That's why I see, something like ephemeris is so useful. As you say, declinations. I mean, yes, you can find them out there, but it's not part and parcel of it. But I think, again, if students are looking at a book, they've got a book, and they see declination, it's like, well, what's that about?
Yeah.
And they want to find out about it. They want to, expand their knowledge and understanding what the declination side of things are as well.
So anyway, all this talk of planets and, what do you think of these new ones? The centaurs, CNOs. Are you enthusiastic about them, or are you on the other camp?
No, I'm enthusiastic. I mean, I've used Chiron for years, and obviously we're living in an age now when, as astrologers, we are going to become overwhelmed with new bodies.
We already can be if we want to be, can't we?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But it's only going to get worse as they discover.
Probably, yeah.
Probably 100 a year coming up. I think they're fascinating. As I said, I've certainly, looked at some of the centaurs. As I said, I certainly used Chiron. I was very fascinated with the whole Eris, particularly because it, involved the demotion of Pluto as a planet and how that whole thing came about. So interested in that. Obviously, a lot of them are very slow moving. The newer ones, obviously, trans-Neptunians and stuff. And so, therefore, as the psychological story, it brings up a lot about the collective. And I think, some of them are going to be absolutely fascinating with regards to that, as to, what are they, what little aspect of the collective are they showing, and why have they come into focus now in this type of thing. So I think that side of it's interesting. Obviously, natally, if you have, a sun conjunct Eris, or a moon conjunct Nessus, etc. What that will mean, and I think that's fascinating work. There's some great astrologers doing a lot of really good work doing that. I think it's going to take time. We can't just immediately jump into knowing what a planet is, although it is a lot easier nowadays because we can cast charts for whenever. And use Ephemeris for the new planets, etc., and find out where they are. But it still takes time to research, to look at what happens when they change sign, to look at what happens when they're strongly aspecting something in a person's chart. And I think we also, much as I love the idea of myth and etc., I think we also have to be a little bit careful of the names are chosen for a planet that there's a tendency to immediately jump into the myth.
Yeah.
And whilst I think that helps inform things, I think we do have to be careful as astrologers that we don't go, okay, here's the planet, this is what it's named, here's the myth about it, therefore it is about this. And I think, it's very easy to then sort of look for a type of, as the, people say, confirmation bias, because that's what you're looking for. So I think we have to be very open about it and look at it in that way. And as I said, I say that as someone who absolutely adores using myths in astrology, but there is that, it almost becomes an easy option sometimes. I think it's something that we have to just, keep in check and bear in mind, but, go back to just pure hard study of charts and see what they're doing and building our, interpretation of it from there. I know there are a lot of people that don't want to use them. I don't quite know why. I think, okay, there are a lot of them, so I think we probably have to focus and, maybe pick 2 or 3 that appeal to us personally and go, okay, I want to look at these ones. And then, as a sort of crowd of astrologers, we'll gradually bring in that knowledge together. But I always find this sort of tendency of going, oh, well, some people, happy, where there's 7 planets and that's it, that's enough. And I always think, well, that seems a strange thing for astrologers to me. If you look back at the great traditional astrologers, of course they used those planets because they were the only ones they could see. But I'm sure that, if Ptolemy could have seen other bodies orbiting and plotted them, etc., he would have embraced the fact that there were new things for him to discover and new things to play with. So that's sort of the side of the fence that I said, well, let's look at them, let's build a body of knowledge on them.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who don't like the asteroids. They just say, oh, well, I'm not going to take any notice of some, what would they call them, lumps of dead rock. But that's the cause and effect sort of attitude, isn't it? Because if you're looking at it that way, you're sort of assuming, well, it's rocks in the sky that cause things. It's. I mean, have you used the four main asteroids on a birth chart? Have you
I have that.
bothered
I
with
don't
them?
all the time,
Yeah.
but I certainly look at them, at various times. I mean, there are certain things I'll sort of do with the client work because I know where my focus needs to be. But when I'm playing around and looking at various things, yeah, absolutely, I'll bring in all sorts of things.
Do they work strongly? Do they have a powerful role?
I think there's certainly an influence. And as I said, it's not my prime area of sort of where I approach my astrology from, but I've seen some wonderful work by people working with those and bringing in various different objects. I mean, I think my own take is you have to sort of draw a line somewhere, and that's not drawing a line going, they're rubbish. It's more drawing a line of how much, can I work with comfortably to give the information that I need to give to my client, and so on. And so, that's the sort of approach I tend to take and bring in things that fascinate me that I want to work with.
Yeah.
I think that there is so much now. As I said, it's only going to get more expansive. That I think, you have to go. Okay, well,
it's also having the time, isn't it, to research them. I don't have the time to devote. I would love to have more time to devote to researching these other centaurs. I know that I've spent a little time studying Nessus. And you go back and you look at the transits. You look back through your life, and it's there in prominent positions. It's at prominent times. When there is some sort of change, and Chiron too. So I'm thinking that Nessus one day will be a big important feature of the chart.
I think so. I think what we may see though is astrologers specialising in certain ones.
Yeah.
And as I said, it'll be the ones that they've particularly noticed cropping up in their own chart or whatever, and they'll bring certain ones in. I mean, as you said, if you draw up a chart now and you put in every single asteroid, new planet, trans-Neptunian centaur, etc., Lilith, whatever you want to use, and so you just got such a overwhelming mass of,
and then we do all the midpoints.
And the midpoints, and then maybe you want to do harmonics.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so overwhelmed with techniques and abilities to do stuff now, and to do it quickly because of software and stuff that it is easy to get overwhelmed. But I think it's we'll see that this astrology, specialising in perhaps Nessus or the other centaurs, as perhaps Melanie Reinhardt's done to an extent, and obviously a strong astrologer or all the stuff, but they will always bring those ones in, whereas another astrologer may want to bring in Ceres, this type of thing. Another will use asteroids strongly, and so I think that's probably areas that we'll see developing, these sort of areas of specialisation.
Yeah. Tell us about psychological astrology. Tell us about what you do.
Well, I mean, my take on it really is that I think it was just what fascinated me growing up. I was always interested in psychology as well as astrology, and so then starting to discover books that covered both, that just fitted what I wanted. But for me, I never had this overwhelming desire to just predict things.
Yeah.
To say, well, this will happen. When Saturn goes here, you're going to lose your job, or you're going to have this, or whatever. I wanted to understand what was behind that and what was going on within ourselves. And so, for me, psychological astrology is applying that role of astrology to understanding who we are. And that, I feel, is far more useful. My own experience of the Venus-Neptune, being able to say to somebody, do you think you have a tendency to do this?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be like that light bulb going on, and you've helped them in their life, and that for me is the role of an astrologer, to help someone navigate their life better and to be more happy and comfortable with who they are. not change who they are, not make them frightened of this thing is going to happen, but just, be able to work with things. And so, for me, that was the beauty of psychological astrology, to be able to understand, this is why you do things. This is why you get angry at that thing that certain way. This is why you tend to slip into depression at times rather than being able to cope with certain things. And, to be able to help people in that way and help them understand it, by using the astrology, I think is just invaluable, and it allows people to take control of their own lives more, and to be able to look at their relationships and to look at what they do and question it and learn about themselves and grow. And the same, with certain transits or progressions, rather than it be, well, this is when you're going to get divorced or whatever, to be able to say to them, well, this is what's happening. These are the areas of your life that are probably going to be tested or challenged, and this is perhaps what you need to understand about yourself, and allow them to use the transits to help navigate their life rather than, change anything, but, to understand that growth process and what it's about. And that, for me, is what I like about astrology. And obviously I appreciate there are many different types of astrology, but that was what appealed to me and what I found most important, and how I wanted to help people.
So, psychological astrology is rooted in Jung, yeah?
Yeah, I think it probably goes back further. I think it's very rooted in Greek philosophy as well, sort of before that, as Jung took from that. So, so psychological astrology to take from Jung as well. And it was a sort of two-way process, really. Jung took a fair bit from astrology. So it's a sort of, mutual appreciation society, I think. But yes, certainly, we do use a lot of Jungian ideas and use that to describe. But these are, as I said, the astrology sort of predates that. It was already there, but we're just perhaps using that paradigm to explain things to people in a certain way and to use those terms. People, even if people hadn't read Jung or understand that much, there are a lot of his ideas that are sort of firmly in public consciousness. You mentioned the sort of anima and animus, and again, if people don't know what it is, they've heard of it, they've got a rough idea of it. That's the masculine and feminine side. People have heard of the shadow, they've heard of the persona, and this type of thing. And I think, it helps people to understand what you're talking about. Describe who they are and how they work in that particular way.
Do most people understand? When you explain some of the mechanism of projection to them, and you explain to them why that relationship didn't work out right, and because it was what you were projecting onto the other part. Do most people get that?
Yeah, I think so. And you can only. It's the old cliche is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And you can point things out to people, but people have to be at a particular time in their life or ready to be able to look at that. And that can happen at any time. You can be very young and be able to realise it, or it can take you decades. I think sometimes as astrologers, we can't show everything to them, but we can, just make little comments or plant seeds that, you then find that something that in an original consultation somebody said, oh, I don't really see that. 6 months later he's ringing you up saying, I've just listened to the recording again, and you said this, and that's exactly me, and I've just realised it, and can we meet again? And you get that type of thing as well. So, it's about when people are ready, but I think they're very open to it. Obviously, the clients that I see, I make it very clear on my website and this type that that this is the astrology I do.
Yeah.
And so I think if people have sought out and found psychological astrology, it's because they have an interest in those ideas, and so therefore they are very prepared to take on board and to look at it from that perspective. But I think, as any astrologer, whatever you do as an astrologer, you just have to be really, really clear. This is the type of astrology I do. This is the type of work, and then you attract the clients that are interested in that same area, and will work with you in that.
Mm. So, how would you define Jungian archetypes, or any particular one?
Well,
if someone asked you,
I think the idea of archetype, and I don't think even Jung was totally clear on this himself. He's
right, yes,
moved between various ideas throughout his life. But it's the idea. I think the way I would think, that there are just some fundamental, patterns of behaviour or ways of being that have existed since the beginning of mankind and continue to exist, and they have certain characteristics, and you can see these coming through. So for example, you have the archetype of the old man, if you like, on the senex, and which echoes with the idea of Saturn, and it brings through this idea of what people think of, if you like, sort of almost stereotypically when they think of the old man, as perhaps someone who's a bit stuck in their ways, who's restrictive, who views the idea of time, who views the idea of having to plan through things and work through things, who perhaps is older than their years, etc. You can even see it in younger people, compared to, say, something like the puer, which is the young, the sort of eternal youth, someone that will never grow up, and we all know people like this, and we see that, and we can also see us acting in that way, if we have that sort of capability, throughout different peoples and throughout our lives. So I think it's these strong ideas, or these strong types, if you like, that just resonate with people. It's something that we've all seen, and that's the idea behind it. It's something that's sort of part of us, but also beyond us. And if you sort of bring in the idea of the collective unconscious, and that there is a store of all the knowledge of our cultures, our histories, our experiences, and certain things are just fundamental to the human experience. And I think people recognise that. I think people can see that.
Are they like Platonic forms?
I think that, and certainly Jung, I think at times was happy to use that idea, and then he developed certain things, and there were times when he sort of, that's the focus of it, and times another. I think they're quite flexible.
Because, Platonic forms can be, not wholly, but they can be described as archetypes, can't they?
Yeah.
It's the archetype for the material existence of something.
That's right,
Yeah.
I think it just, the Platonic thing, tends to work on that material level. And, at times Jung was sort of happy to go along with that, and at other times, he was bringing in a more metaphysical level, if you like.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to what I was saying about skepticism and some of the people that I know, that it's with Jungian archetypes and even Platonic images, it's the idea that these things already exist, and then the material scientist says, well, where do they exist? And you have to say, well, in the abstract realm, and that you can't go any further than that.
Well, yeah, you can't place it. There isn't an answer that you can give that would satisfy. And we are. I think it's starting to perhaps shift again, but certainly for the last 10, 15 years, we have been. There was an upsurge of the scientific paradigm as explaining everything, and as the only way to explain everything.
Of course, we do have quantum physics now as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. That there are certain, absolutely uncertainties within science, but a scientist would argue that yes, but we know about them because we need to make certain assumptions in order to make these calculations work. Therefore, we might not know exactly what it is, but we know something. And I think, as soon as you're dealing with stuff that's just about people's minds, that goes out the window.
Yeah.
Which is, fine when you're working on a biological level and you want to know about, the chemicals in the brain and how they work and how they send messages, etc. And we know a huge amount. And I don't want to dismiss science because it's incredibly valuable. I mean, I worked as a sort of research scientist when I was younger myself, and I took A-levels and further education, in science.
Which particular field was that?
Biology and chemistry.
Biology and chemistry, right.
Yeah. So, I don't like sometimes, that people then dismiss it and go, oh, but that's wrong. It's a perfectly valid paradigm for a lot of things. Where I think the problem has come in recent years, with perhaps people like Richard Dawkins, who is a fantastic writer on evolutionary theorem, and has written some excellent books. And yet, this idea that science has to be able to explain everything or it does not exist, I think is quite a pity. And I think, most... And
not very scientific.
Sorry?
To like you say, that this idea that science has to explain everything isn't scientific. It's just an assumption.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, what do you think about Aquarius and the internet?
I think that was an absolutely fascinating time, and I think it was doubly so because you had the mutual reception, or that for part of the time Neptune was in Aquarius, you had Uranus in Pisces.
Yeah. So
it was sort of working both ways, if you like, and so I think that era stands out very much. But I mean, one of the things about it, Neptune, as she talks about in the book, is our quest for redemption, if you like. And so wherever Neptune is, the collective tends to look at that as the area that will, save them, etc., and also the area that will give us glamour, etc. And when Neptune went through Aquarius, technology was the redemption. Science was the redemption, and hence that I think that scientific paradigm came up during there because people were looking. We need an answer, and the answer was in the Aquarian thing. So it was technology, it was science, it was something a logical process that people could follow. As far as fads and fashion with that, the sort of the apple of temptation was an Apple product. iPhone became a fashion accessory. An iPad was a status.
Yeah, it just seemed to me very, very, very strongly that the internet is an Aquarian thing. It's it's democratic. It's new science. There's a level playing field.
And we're looking. If you had a question, you didn't talk to your counsellor, where you Googled it. And it became this, that technology could solve everything, and the internet, would be the thing that, you could learn everything from it. You could do everything from it.
And Aquarius is a little bit like the 11th house. It's about the group. It's about group consciousness. So by implication, that there's no central authority, just like the internet.
Yeah.
Or so they tell us.
Yes. That was the beauty of the idea. Since things have changed, we found out a bit more about that, haven't we?
We are being spied upon, of course.
But yes, absolutely. And people are still very passionate about keeping that freedom for the internet, I think.
There's another Aquarian word.
That Aquarian idea.
Freedom.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah.
People get very angry when, Google searches are blocked in certain countries where you can't see this here and that. And, I hope that maintains it. I like that idea for the internet. And certainly, it was part of the fashion. The idea of surfing the web and the global community is that wonderful mixture of sort of, Pisces and Aquarius things and Neptune and Uranus. Even the term,
surfing, yes.
When it came out, that's
something that you do on the sea, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Superb, yes.
I think it's fascinating. But I think, as Neptune's moved on, as Liz talks about in the book, that it moves out the sign and things, the scales fall from the eyes a little bit, things change, and as we said, we've already seen the whole, hang on, the government and these people are spying on us through what we do. In the UK, they just did that emergency bill if we want to read all your emails and mobile phone things, to stop terrorism, allegedly. So, those sort of scales are falling, that it is just this, open playground of community. And I think, we're going to get new fashions, and Neptune in Pisces, we're still at quite early phase of it, and it's often, as it sort of moves through it, and obviously there's an awful lot going on with the outer planets at the moment as well, with Uranus and Pluto, etc. But I think, this time we're looking for something perhaps more human. The idea of Pisces is about, I think it's about, connecting to something that's bigger than you are. And so I think we will see, certain things change. And I think what we were talking about, this idea, the scientific paradigm, I think, there are going to be more questions asked about, well, is this the only way to explain things? And people will be looking for, for something else. You'll see it in media and in, music and in fashions as well. I mean, I think it was interesting, that at the end of, as Neptune just started to go into Pisces, it was the film The Artist won the Best Picture, which was this strange silent black and white film that you think, well, how did that happen? But again, it sums up that sort of glamour of an older era, of something perhaps quite romantic and different. And it also, it was the end of Neptune Aquarius, but things like Inception came out, and this whole sort of dreamlike existence and worlds folding in on itself. And yes, there was still the technology part, which was the Aquarius, but you also had that whole sort of Neptunian dreamlike state to it.
And don't forget, quantum physics now has a new category now. They call it skepticism.
Yeah.
So that you've got, and it's heavily criticised by the more orthodox wing, but you've got science, so if you like, science and the spirit coming together.
Yeah.
Much more, so that the objectivity, as it were, in some of these new experiments, is dying a death, because it always involves us. Rather than me in here observing what's going on out there, me in here changes what's going on out there, changes the state of the electron, or essentially we affect. It's even been suggested by, I think it was Heinz Pagels, that he said something like, to ask about the position of the electron is meaningless, and in fact they only seem to appear when we, almost as if we create them by looking for them, which is
magical thinking.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I think that this is part of the shift that we might see with as Neptune goes through Pisces. I think we will see things opening up and changing. And I think that can be one of the good things of it. I thought it was interesting as well. There was a big report I saw on the TV about designer drugs and new drugs, recreational drugs, if you like. And again, that to me is very Neptune, in that they can't keep up with banning, these so-called legal drugs, where they take a compound and then by altering one part of it, it's a similar drug, but there is no law banning it. So every week now, there's new drugs coming on the market that are supposed to be legal, etc. And there's just this whole sort of plethora, and I think that's quite Neptune in Pisces. This sort of, a mass that is just spreading and they really don't know what to do about it. There's no way to sort of put it in the box.
So you mean some of the limitations and boundaries that the authorities would try and impose are sort of becoming undermined?
Yeah.
Isn't that also like Pluto with Capricorn?
And you can't,
the undermining of authority.
Yeah, and I could separate any of this at the moment. I mean, and it's interesting because the last time Neptune was in Pisces, you had the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Aries.
Yeah.
So both periods of history are actually quite difficult to separate out from, because they all overlay and reflect on each other. So yeah, absolutely. The Pluto in Capricorn, the Uranus in Aries, the square between them, and then recently the Saturn in Scorpio, which is the mutual reception with Pluto in Capricorn, and they've all sort of linked in and to sort of bring about certain things in the world. And it's that classic, may you live in interesting times. And I think we certainly have been living in interesting times.
What needs to be changed?
You need to change things. But it doesn't mean that, as soon as Pluto comes out, suddenly all the people in power can be trusted and everything's wonderful and we've sorted that problem.
Yeah.
We saw it with Pluto in Sagittarius, with the whole idea, of religion and terrorism and people seeing different religions as an enemy again and this type of thing. It's come out of Sagittarius. It hasn't solved the problem. We're just more aware of that problem. And hopefully talking about it more and trying to reach certain things. But it's not suddenly magically made everything better. And, they work on such long cycles that, we have to bear that in mind and work with it, as people to go, okay, it's not suddenly going to make everything better, but we have to remain aware of this.
Yeah.
And we have to work to make sure this never happens again.
Sure. Well, John Green, we've done enough for 2 interviews here. And it's fantastic to talk to you, but all these marvellous things. Is there anything that you wanted to say in closing?
I just think, for all of us that are interested in astrology, it's always worth learning new things. It's always worth, using the planets to navigate areas of our life, and also I think that essence of what I was just saying, that as a collective we change the future and it's not up to others, so we all have to be involved in that.
Yeah.
And as astrologers we have a better idea than most of where those lessons can be learned right now, and we need to take responsibility for that, I think.
Sure. Anyway, John Green, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, James.
Cheers. Thank you very much.